And I'm happy to begin in this way. I want you to buy that book sometime and just read through it. It has a lot of great content. But the most important book, the Bible, containing 2 Peter, just 3 chapters. We are now in the latter half of chapter 2, describing the false prophets. And so at this point, it's possible that some of the points may be redundant, and yet listen carefully for some points that just might stand out to you more so. This paragraph, not highlighted, I want to try to read it in its entirety. It's also in your hands on the outline. Rusty Hills did a great job with his 5 Minutes with God Devo book we used years ago, summarizing the first half of that chapter. So this will catch us up to speed. In contrast to the godly men who, by inspiration, penned the holy words of the Bible, there had always been and would always be others, false prophets and false teachers, who would come in among God's people to distort the word. I'll skip a few lines for emphasis. Some of this is what we know. Peter's purpose is not to simply warn about the presence of these false teachers, but to assure his readers that God will not allow them to continue to oppose him without facing his righteous wrath. They will have to. So the angels who sinned, the world of Noah's day, the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, all of these are chilling examples of God's righteousness and judgment, with the promise that those who lead people away from God through false teaching will come under a similar condemnation. And as we'll study tonight, intensified, more severe warning and punishment. It is a sobering thought to consider the consequences of straying away from God's word. May we be ever diligent to be faithful to God and not led away by false teaching. That is a good summary for the first half of chapter 2. Mentioned a summary point last week. Peter's main point is that false teachers are dangerous. They work quietly sometimes. They appeal to desire and are already under God's judgment, while God still knows how to rescue the faithful. I'm more concerned about that part right there, but it is a warning to make sure I stay faithful, obviously. And there's another snippet that I provided you with. It's a good summary in a more condensed fashion just for verses 12 through 17. Peter is bold and blunt here. False teachers are natural brute beasts. They follow their instincts without regard of consequence. God seems silent in the face of wickedness sometimes, but they will receive the wages of their unrighteousness. And eternal darkness is described as that impending judgment, held in reserve under his watch. Yes, reservation for wrath, and more to come. This is a slide that we use to listen to the chapter. We don't have time for that again tonight, but it's highlighting what we're discussing. They will be judged for their rebellion and particularly their sensuality, which fueled their rebellion. And sadly, it's causing a lot of people then and now to go astray. So let's get into the text time. Verses 14 through 16 I want to read for sake of fresh in mind familiarity. Having eyes full of adultery and that cannot cease from sin, enticing unstable souls, they have a heart trained in covetous practices and are accursed children. They have forsaken the right way, gone astray, following the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness, but he was rebuked. Okay, I'll pause there. On this text study now from Denny Petrillo, verse 14, some highlights for you. We're in the 13th description of these false teachers. The 13th description is they have eyes full of adultery. So, as you see on the screen perhaps, every lady they looked at, they lusted after. He brings that point out. If your eyes are full of adultery, that's the intent of the heart, and it's projected on every person, I'll say, that you see. The Greek literally reads this as, and I'm taking his word for this one, this is the one I did not double check, that his eyes were full of an adulteress. They did not look at a woman as a sister in Christ or a child of God, but a potential partner. And if that's in your heart, that's what's in their mind, and that's what they're thinking about. Can you imagine that? Always in your mind, thinking that. And the application in modern terminology is checking him out or checking her out. And that's what they are like. Now remember that mindset, because the 14th description is they never cease from sin. I only highlighted this. Their sinful activities are continual. Even in the daylight, it's whatever it is. That's how they live. That's what they're given to. Now I'm going to be speedy, so if you want to add anything, I might remember to pause at a good point. But I've got a lot of pages, and you'll see that I'm only highlighting the key points. I want to get through as much of his good study as I can. So here's what they are. Full of adultery, they never cease from sin. This is what they're given to. And I'll later add, as I will emphasize now, overcome with. The 15th description is they are enticing unstable souls. They are enticing them. Well, unstable in the category of maybe new Christians or those who are beginning to sway. How could men of such immoral characteristics influence anyone, particularly in the church? That's what makes this, in some people's eyes, our author's most amazing part. Shouldn't even the most naive see through them? Well, apparently not. How do they succeed? They succeed by enticing, which is by definition to arouse someone's interest and allure, entice. So first, they are very good at what they do. Smooth talkers, charismatic. Second, they have produced a convincing message. And it is convincing indeed. We're going to, shall I say, flesh this out. It could have focused on the idea that God made us sexual beings and therefore intends for us to freely enjoy sexual relationships. That's not an element to ignore. Or it could have suggested that God wants them to be happy, which is familiar, and that happiness should be found in numerous activities. Basically, anything you want to do. If it feels good, do it. So, the highlight is their promotion of sexual freedom is tied to their belief that there will be no judgment. So if you have that idea going into it, and if you convince yourself that there won't be, then anything goes. But then you want to ease the conscience and maybe rationalize what is good or not good based on the word of Jesus. And if you deny that Jesus is coming back like he said he will, what else will you deny? So keep all these thoughts in mind. Third, a characteristic, their victims are unstable souls. That's their target, unstable souls. And this identifies them as weak or unsettled. The heretics are seeking out those who are weak in the faith. That's why it is so important to make sure you know the Word. Not what people say the Word says, but make sure you are in it so much that you can tell when someone is misusing an accurately quoted verse. And that happens all the time. So, since the verse directs our attention to this, perhaps the teachers enticed people to sin by promising things, which we imply that they were promising something, that they could live for, it's a given, sexual pleasure without the judgment, which is a theology of too good to pass up. And again, today, you hear it manifested in many ways. God wants me happy. If it feels good, do it. I know the word says this, but. So it's however people rationalize it. But as we mentioned last week, I'm curious, how did it happen back then? David and others and Jeremy made some great comments about the word was not compiled and preserved the way we have it today. Some epistles may have not even been written yet or are being written at the time that Peter's writing this. It throws people off to hear that the gospel accounts were written many years after the fact, 30 years after the fact. But they're writing all this down. They hear the word. They need to be reminded, search the scriptures, the ones that they had, and hearing from directly an apostle is the authoritative, the authoritative word. So this kind of lines them back in to look at Jesus. Here is the 16th description. They have a heart trained in greed. Greed is at the core. Greed for what? Essentially whatever you want as opposed to whatever God wants. A humble heart seeks God's will, but if you do something you want, that's usually at odds with God, and that's where sin comes in. And the word trained, they're trained in greed. That implies, and I'm glad that he brings us out in the text, we get the word gymnasium from this word trained, which their implication is these people are experts. They have this manipulation down to a science. They know how to rationalize an argumentation, fool themselves because they already have, or fool others because it's fun for them. Wow, these false teachers were out for what they could get out of their religion, whatever that was. Whatever that was. It's interesting, though, you ignore or are, as he says, sometimes ignorant of the word to take away some of it in order to put in what you want, because that's not our position to do. Part of doing that is the consequence that comes from not seeking God's will at judgment. And yes, that's good motivation, but what's the motivation to live for God? It should be for righteousness' sake. And that's not what they care about. So, Peter takes a break from this description and just reminds us of that moral judgment. Yes, he applies a moral judgment on this based on the accuracy of the word. He says, they are accursed children, blissfully unaware of the terrible fate that awaits them. What a horrible day it will be when they find themselves face to face with God, the God they mocked. And that's the key. We're learning a lot together. We're growing a lot together. There's some things that each of us know that the other one doesn't. And it's not as much of a balanced scale of knowledge as much as it is, are we resolved on the identity and teachings of Christ and pursuing His ways to grow thereby? And if we are, then that's good. But if we're not, would we be able to spot people among us who are not quite on that narrow path like they need to be, and let's be cause of concern to save their souls and others? Before we get into verses 15 and 16, I mentioned a lot of things. Just taking a pause. What would you like to emphasize or questions to ask based on the text so far? I agree. Okay. Verses 15 and 16, the 17th description is, they are forsaking the right way. Well, that's obvious, but that's from the text. The right way meaning the message of truth, the true knowledge, as Peter would say in verse 3 and 8 of chapter 1, which will enable them to escape the corruption that is in the world through lust or by lust. Next time you hear that verse in its totality quoted, you might remember our study. These false teachers, 2 Peter chapter 2, were driven by this, overcome by this, and using this as their sales pitch to sway minds. Peter has a message of true knowledge, which will enable them to escape that. But these heretics, he calls them out, have forsaken this. That's the key. We don't have a complete handle on truth. We're learning in the sense that we're growing. But have we denied it? Have we turned away from the truth? These men were once faithful Christians, but now not. He goes into the 18th description. They've gone astray. He says the given, but he's emphasizing what go astray means, from something that you were once a part of. It's so important with other false teachings out there to emphasize they were, in that one time, in the Lord, safe and saved, but turned away. They were overcome with lust and greed. Peter is going to offer his readers a history lesson and goes back to Numbers 22 through 24. Balaam, we often hear it as Balaam's donkey. It's a hilarious account in a way, but it's also a sad account. This author brings out the fact that it's sad, and he did it in a way I would have never expected. Balaam, who was given wonderful opportunities by God, loved the wages of unrighteousness. Balaam was supposed to be a prophet, but loved money more than God, and the prophets that came with going against God's will momentarily, fame and fortune, whatever it was, instead of obeying. He was also a teacher of immorality, we are told, so it goes with his character. As a result, he was rebuked by God through a donkey. Well, God created everything, so it's no problem for him to speak through anything. But for a donkey to rebuke the prophet's madness reflects not only on the foolishness of Balaam, which is where I've kind of stopped, but also on that of all false teachers. I hadn't looked at it from that perspective. Because Peter references Balaam, and you have the foolishness attached with that scenario, he's pulling that foolishness into everyone he's talking about in his epistle. Interesting. So the way of Balaam is not explained any further. 3 suggested points, though. Greed, leading people to sin, and claiming to be God's prophet or teacher is the most probable point of comparison since it's mentioned in verse 14. I'll take that. But then he goes further. Balaam is also described as one who loved gain from wrongdoing. It was love of money that caused Balaam to lead Israel to sin. And that is foolish. These false prophets, these false teachers among them today, in some respects are no different. The warning is still the same, the consequence is severe, and the Christians should take heed to not listen to any part of it. So verse 17 is a natural transition with a little illustration, word pictures. I like word pictures. Peter says they're like springs without water. Springs without water. And if you're in a dry climate, whether then or now or any time, we always need water. It's precious. But if you're desperate for water and you see a well and you approach it and you realize it's empty, what a hard letdown that is. That's what these false teachers are compared as. They promise great things, pleasures and happiness, the things of this world, but they don't deliver joy, what really lasts beyond this world. In fact, it's quite the opposite. So scribes and Pharisees promised much, but when the people went for them for spiritual guidance, they were left empty-handed, like a fig tree that was cursed. That's a good pause point. Any comments or questions? We care about truth. That's the key, truth. So, another illustration is the 20th there, the 20th. I think I skipped a slide, so I'm going to go back. Well, maybe not. We'll see. 19th, springs without water, yes. Oh, yeah. Blurry over there. They are mists driven by a storm. Similar. But he pulls in Ephesians 4:14 as an illustration to reference the truth that the Spirit inspired Paul to write. We need to be so solid that we're not thrown off course by lack of vision, tossed to and fro. And that's the idea. Know the truth, not be deceived. Peter reminds of the consequence. The black darkness has been reserved. The black darkness has been reserved. So there's some word studies that he goes into. The word reserved means the place, where there's gnashing of teeth, Matthew 8:22. And earlier, Peter had said that the sinning angels, we studied this last week, committed to the pits of darkness. They're there, but also punishment's reserved. So some things I'm not exactly sure how to fit in chronologically, except that they're there, and some things are only going to get worse. Jesus had described hell as a place of outer darkness, Matthew 25:30. And this word reserved means, a future appointment. That is inescapable. So the heretics don't think that they have such an appointment, or else they would not be giving themselves to the life that is in blatant contradiction to the will that they heard and lived by. So that's an observation. They were either convinced by others or convinced themselves for one reason or another to just deny and disbelieve, but to hold on to some things, which is interesting. We've often said that Christianity is not a smorgasbord. You can't pick and choose. It's a commitment, and that's where the challenge comes when your will goes against a command of God, and we've got to mature in God's ways. That's where it gets tough. Verse 18, the 21st description of these false teachers are, and again, false teaching, these are people who blatantly denied Christ. That's the bottom line. They are speaking out. They're speaking out publicly. So, yeah, they work in secret, but now they're not ashamed to voice what they believe. They are bold and sometimes brash. Sometimes in that speaking, they reveal what they are ignorant of, or they're not as much of afraid of truth because of their backing and sway, but they know there's opposition there when they do. It's almost like it doesn't matter to them. But their words are arrogant. Their words are empty and arrogant, which is haughty, pompous, bombastic, of excessive size, puffed up, but of no value. This word for vanity means a state of being without use or value, emptiness, futility, transitoriness, and purposelessness. Tongue twisted on that one. Didn't rehearse that, but that's what it means. Their teachings are useless. I don't want any part of that. And when you're hearing great public speaker. Take the truth, yes, but if you're hearing someone who's advocating something that is against God's will, in your mind say, danger, danger. Don't take any of that. Watch out. Listen more closely, and they have the message of society today. They entice by fleshly desires. There is a philosophy of attraction that I want to feel like I'm okay with either no Jesus or the Jesus that I've made for myself. But the truth is, people just want to feel good in one way or another. The gospel will sometimes counter the idea that you're okay without Jesus, because the whole point of the gospel is you need him, and he's done all this for you. But the word entice, how do they entice these Christians who've just come to the Lord? It's verse 14. It's the word for a fishing lure, anything to seduce or attract. It's just like any temptation. What do you like? What do you want? That goes against God's will. Well, that's what you'll be enticed by. Their bait is, and we're all physical creatures, but their bait is fleshly desire. And that word desire isn't all negative, of course. It's desire. God's designed us in many ways. But however, coupled with the word fleshly desire, the connotation is not saying that flesh and God's creation is inherently sinful. That's another dangerous zone, to deny the identity of God in flesh. No, God created all things to enjoy, but this phrase takes on the sinful desire categorized by lust. He clarifies it as well, but fleshly desire is lust. And that lust is driven to ways contrary to God's will. So it's fueled by, psychologically, their insatiable desire for sexual gratification. That's again what they're given to. That's what they're overcome with. That is, in many respects, the motivating factor for causing either listening to or convincing yourselves of these heretic philosophies that are outside Christianity, which was one of the things that was most amazing, is how can something outside of Christianity be brought in the first place? Well, we're going to get into that in this next little section. The 23rd description is that they entice by sensuality. Sensuality means a lack of self-restraint, so in conduct that violates what is sometimes even socially acceptable. This serves as a lure. This is what they want. And if you can convince a person whatever is okay, then okay. I mean, you're there. These false teachers are influencing those who barely escaped, or barely escape. What does that mean? Okay, we're in let's see. He's referencing verse 20, but the text... Okay, the word escape. Let's focus on the word first. The word escape indicates the person recently escaped from the corruption that is in this world through lust. These are the new converts. They escaped the world, and they're going back to it. They narrowly escaped that because of hearing the gospel, but then they go back. Jesus refers to new converts as the little ones who believe in me, and how especially critical of a stumbling block that he gives to those who cause new converts to stumble. Oh, the judgment will be harsh, and there is a sense of degrees of punishment that are there, and I don't want to experience that. I'd rather experience degrees of reward if good or in my favor, but it's serious stuff. So I noticed on the handout here and also on the screen, I highlighted different colors so that we could emphasize. False teachers are targeting the new converts because they will be much easier to hook more than the mature Christians. These new converts are presently unstable. Well, doctrine of error tends to work that way. That's why it's so important we teach the Word. Teach the Word. So the 24th description is that these false teachers are ones who live in error. The word error is common, and it means wandering from the path of truth, delusion, or deceit, deception. Okay. Not making an occasional mistake. Nope, they live in it. So it's not like a Christian who lapses into sin and loathes it and repents and just keeps on following the Lord. No, this is someone who leaps into sin and loves it. They are immersed in it, but they're also overcome by it. They don't realize all the dangerous traps and creatures in that apparently beautiful lake, for example. His concern is that the new converts have escaped from these men, but that they are drawn back into their pre-Christian lifestyle. He doesn't want that. He hopes to prevent that. But I won't say most importantly, it's all important. A warning to Christians, don't sway from the truth. This is a good pause point. Because we're going to get into some fun stuff. It's all fun, but some more fun stuff. Any questions or comments to this point? Any questions about the wording, the flow of argumentation here? Mainly just descriptions of these false teachers.
Just a comment.
Okay, D?
You know, in this day and time, the number of atheists and agnostics have just grown since I was
Afraid so.
huge.
Yeah, for sure.
But Peter is much more concerned about false teaching in the church
Mm-hmm.
and all these others
Okay.
that are out there. And if you think about it, there's probably not a lot of those people that are making us go an era where inside the church, it's, as he says here, attacks the new converts, sways them over to a different philosophy and thinking, and that's where we're in trouble.
We need to make sure. Okay, Steve?
Right.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad you're bringing this out as well. And okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Wow.
False teachers can be very conducive to leading people away. And of course, we're not supposed to follow people either. We're supposed to follow God's word as well as through Christ.
Amen.
So I think it really is an indication in our society today. We're just not very mature in the Scripture. We're swayed very easily by could be people, could be majority of people. It doesn't say that in the Scriptures that we're supposed to follow the majority and follow what God says. So that means, as a Christian, is growth. Doesn't mean knowledge. You can have all the knowledge.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah.
None effect. So.
Excellent points. I want to compile and relate for those of you silently listening online. We heard a great discussion. De-emphasized a strong truth. The members, the mature members within a church, keep each other strong, and that's a great thing. We need to be mindful of the danger of these who are growing in the faith, who have just entered and are growing, not to be swayed by the countless influences of bombardment of worldly philosophies that are all around them. We need to intentionally counter that so that we protect those who come in and as they grow, because that is where the danger is. Steve added in conversations like this, it's not countering points, it's additional perspectives that remind us we are at different ages and stages of Christian growth. So whatever our age is and however long we've been attending here, if we are not strong enough to detect error, we've been doing something wrong. Doesn't matter how well refined, researched, and presented the lessons are by the classes or the preachers or the ministers or the elders. All of that can be in place. We are personally accountable as well to make sure we take that information in. It's pretty much spoon-fed here. But we've got to take it in, discern it in our minds, and live it out. We've got to be our hardest preacher through the week. Live it out. Like John would say, so that we are never of those not among us. And like Peter would say, staying faithful, not listening to those who would try to subvert from within. And we could usually detect them easily because, like Steve would say, you never follow people. That's just not right. It's just not the grounding for it. But how do people motivate a following? Same way that we've learned the descriptions here.
One more thing.
Steve.
In 2025, there were 5,000 new members of the Church of Christ
Okay.
throughout the United States.
5,000 new members last year.
Less than 5 years. So all these people being swayed from
Yeah.
These are people who've been in the church for years.
Oh.
So that's a strong indication that we need to start being more contributing to what you're saying.
Yeah.
You're out to mature. You don't want to be swayed. You can listen to people's perspectives.
Okay.
That's important to show that we're listening.
Vested, committed, bought in.
Indication, you only have 3% of the members of the Church of Christ throughout the United States, which is the average size
Wow.
of about 150 members.
Yeah.
So,
For sure.
our age is around 64.
Oak Hill is average.
See what I'm saying? The numbers are the baby boomers at 64 means more than
Man.
likely, not only it's newcomers, it's these older generations are being swayed away. So that tells you why.
We have focused too much apathetically from within, not without, not securing the base, starts within the home. We've emphasized these points as well. And we're dying collectively, not growing. But we need to make sure we're spiritually growing to make a difference in every person's lives that we see. That's going to be the key. And evangelistic growth is also the key. Any other key point to emphasize based on these great discussions?
I was going to say,
Jeremy.
Michael, that I'm sitting there trying to figure out this sect or whatever.
Yes. Yes.
When you talk about, from one point, you think these are of the Jewish persuasion because it uses a lot of Old Testament examples. Right? When
Yeah.
you talk about these idea of adultery, sexual passion and stuff, well, that's not Judaism.
Right.
So it's some sort of sect of that, whatever that sect is. And then I think, okay, well, at one point could be, I think, is that Peter is using inspiration to write down and inspire problems that may come in the future.
Sometimes.
That may be coming, which we still use today, right? We're still using these verses
Yeah.
to discuss false teachers.
For sure. Epicurean. And on the screen, it's provided now for you, so I'm not going to rush through this, but Jeremy has that historical perspective that helps application in the future. And we're jump into that sometimes where a little bit more refinement in the past will help us see more clearly what's going on here. I was so excited to get to this right here, and I have just enough time to rush through this and the next, and it'll be a funny conclusion if I word it just right. So hang in there with me. The logical question is, how did these false teachers secure a foothold in the church? Gene Green offers this observation. False teachers in 2 Peter had merged Christian with Epicurean thought. Philosophy not only denied the possibility of future judgment, but also elevated desires to the level of virtue, both features that marked those heretics. So Epicurus distinguished between the natural desires that was necessary, like I need to eat, I need to sleep, the blessed life, satisfies the natural desires and necessary desires, blah, 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 hungry, thirsty. Okay, sexual desires are therefore good in the category of good according to Epicurus. As for myself, I cannot conceive of the good if I eliminate the pleasures of taste, of sex, of listening, blah, 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 of gazing upon the motions and forms pleasing to the eye. I want to, so it has to be good. That's the application of it today, less educated way. But we are pressed hard to imagine how Epicurean thought could have gained a foothold in the church, which is what we're asking kind of a way. Since the Epicureans believed that the gods were not involved in any way in human affairs. So if you have that philosophy that gods don't care about you or never will, and you want to hold on to something about Christianity and merge the two, how did that happen? Did it happen organically? Was it systemic? Well, however, the first century was a period in which deliberate religious and philosophical traditions could be patched together without the kind of consistency that we often erroneously presuppose in our attempts to classify movements. The train tone there makes me think I need to slow down a little bit. We're going too fast. Eclecticism was well established during this period. The trends that the heretics reflect are not difficult to identify, but the exact nature of their belief may well defy systemization. And the most important part is this. The affirmation of bodily gratification was an appealing notion, coupled with the exaltation of freedom, would put a very attractive, though lurid, spin on the apostolic faith. All that is an educated way of saying, I still don't know. But it provides a perspective to Jeremy's question the last 2 weeks, because how did this happen? I don't know. But I'll tell you one thing, it appeals to that desire. And if it wasn't if it wasn't organized, then it could have happened on its own autonomously, because we're all tempted by those same desires. And they were influenced by the cultures that Christianity countered, which is probably what attracted them to Christ anyway. All the good of Christ. But I still want this, but and there's that conflict, you see. So that was fun. At least I enjoyed that. I couldn't wait to get to that. That was fun. They are, let's see, blah, blah, blah. So this whole page at this point just says they're overcome by this. Satan is their true master. They proclaim freedom, but they're really enslaved by sin. That's a different perspective, because they're either not giving it up, or they're encased by it, and they're not willing to let Christ save them and overcome that. So like beasts, they will be destroyed, not because of their errors, but because they ultimately are rejecting Christ, and they're rejecting that fact that he will return. The author makes a point. Scholars are divided over this as to who the they refers to in the last section. This is a textual fun study. It's not worth our precious remaining time for. So here's what I'm going to do. I mean, it's fun stuff, and I've provided for you now everything on chapter 2. But I want to go to Rusty Hill's conclusion, because it just does such a great job. I bet that bell's going to ring. I'm sure that bell's going to ring right when I get the slide up there. You watch. That's just the way it works. No, it didn't. Okay, good. This is awesome. I'm going to capitalize on this. Rusty Hills writes the last summary for the chapter. One of the most dangerous elements of false teachers and their teachings is that they often are very charismatic and persuasive personalities. Malachi, magnetic magnetic. Personality. Very attractive messages. They gain popularity and following by saying things that people want to hear, and avoiding the more uncomfortable and difficult subjects as sin, commitment, and judgment. Peter compares these false teachers to empty wells. We've discussed that. And in the middle here, the result of following after them is to be led away from Christ and back into the bondage of sin. When you consider the results that their false teaching, there's no wonder why the language concerning those who propagate these teachings is so harsh. Much like an earthly parent is very protective of his or her children, God's desire is to protect and save his children. Therefore, his anger is certainly kindled against those who would take his children away from him and lead them toward eternal condemnation. God's harsh words of condemnation towards false teachers are, in essence, an evidence of his love and concern for the spiritual safety of those who are his. So, God's wrath is against sin, justly, because he's holy. I want his love to remain on and with me. So I'm needing to heed his words of truth and seek it, desire to grow. So I have 3 classes. I'll do the next 2, I think, and then Jeremy will teach, and then I'll come back and wrap up chapter 3, and that'll be fun. The month of May is going to be good. Chapter 3 is not going to be easy, so I'm going to let Jeremy answer all the hard questions.